I have what can be considered an addictive personality. I really struggle with managing screen time when all I do for the most part for basically the entire day is sit in front of my computer. I also find it borderline impossible to not eat any junk food if it exists anywhere in the house, even if it's hidden. And I've also had issues in the past with surrounding myself with people who weren't really interested in holding me accountable for anything. Which might sound weird pairing that with the other two things that I just mentioned, but having friends in particular that don't call you out for literally anything is kind of addicting in its own right, I guess. This is definitely not the case anymore, by the way. I'm very lucky to have found friends and loved ones over the past 10 years or so now that keep me in check and that make me a better person. But I'm bringing all of this up because it's something that I think we all struggle with at some point, and so I want to talk about it today, and I also really want to try not to state the obvious if I can. This is a pretty common concept that most of you have heard of or practiced already, I'm sure, but I find that there are aspects of changing your environment that I think get missed or forgotten about. And what I also want to do is bring up willpower and discipline in this conversation as well, and how those, traits, I guess you could call them, fit into this topic. Because there are things about those two as well that also get overlooked, in my opinion. So let's talk about it. First of all, why is changing your environment important? I think simply put, your problems, tendencies, urges, addictions, whatever you want to call them, are much more manageable, or in some cases can be resolved entirely by like a simple shift in your environment. We can lessen the resistance we have towards doing something difficult because of whatever distractions, might be holding us back. And we can catch those feelings before we quit on something important that we might be doing, like a project or something, or just stop ourselves from making poor decisions, both in the short term and in the long run as well. Some of the most common examples obviously being things like if you don't buy any junk food, then you can't eat it. If you put your phone somewhere else or have a partner or family member hold on to it, then you won't be able to endlessly scroll through whatever social media you use. Or if you engage in an activity or a hobby while in a group instead of by yourself, it might be easier to hold yourself accountable for whatever it is that you're doing or working on. These are all pretty typical examples that we can all relate to in some way. But what I really want to stress is not only why making these types of adjustments in your life is important, but also just like kind of how it works. And this is where I want to touch on willpower and discipline for a bit, because here is what really gets us to cave in. Here is what really breaks us and causes these tendencies and urges to get worse. Because when you're dealing with dopamine-inducing urges and or dealing with a difficult wall of resistance in front of you, it really does feel like you only have two options sometimes. You can use willpower or discipline to fight that battle and just push through, or you can just give up for the day. You wave that white flag and just not give a damn anymore. And that happens because, and I guess I'll just speak for myself here, willpower and discipline are amazing resources. They're incredible. Everybody should use them and should learn how to use them. I don't think it's like this black and white perspective that I think a lot of people have on both willpower and discipline, where some people swear by it so hard that they make it a requirement, basically, no matter how you're feeling on any given day, which I suppose is the main definition that people put on discipline in particular. It's the ability to push through something difficult, even when you don't feel like it. But here's the thing, willpower and discipline are finite resources. They are batteries that need to be charged. And I don't think there's a secret to that either, by the way, as far as like recharging, your mental and emotional energy. I think the charger of willpower and discipline is just simply time. I guess you could also think of them both as band-aids. They are great in the moment and honestly necessary in certain situations, because sometimes you really need that band-aid. Sometimes you really need that duct tape to hold things together, but it's just not sustainable. Going back to how like willpower and discipline can be very black and white sort of topics that people talk about, I feel like it's very common self-improvement advice nowadays to just shut the hell up, put your head down, and just do it. And sometimes, yeah, that is what you need, but you can't do it forever, and I think that's what people miss. But with all of that being said, if you can work on changing your environment to better suit your situation, those batteries will deplete slower, or they will have more charge. That band-aid becomes one of those super sticky band-aids that you can literally never take off, or, when you do, you've got all that like sticky residue left on it, if you know what I mean. Rather than those cheap band-aids that when you put a drop of water on them, they just kind of slide right off. I don't know if that's a good analogy, but I'm just gonna keep it in. But in essence, this is the interaction between willpower/discipline and changing your environment, and why it's extremely helpful for most people. But I guess the question remains now, especially for those that may be hearing this kind of advice for the first time, how exactly can we go about changing our environment to make things easier for ourselves? There's obviously a million different examples that I could outline, and maybe I'll name a few, but I think just asking yourself the right questions is probably more useful because you can tailor them to your specific situation. And in my opinion, as I was thinking about this, I feel like there are 3 different buckets or spaces, I guess you could say, of your environment. Hopefully this will make sense, but let me know what you guys think. So we have social space, physical space, and mental space. I'm going to put a question mark on this last one because I feel like examples in mental space could be combined with the other 2 in some way, I guess, but I don't know. We'll see how it goes. I'm going to start with social space first because I think it's the hardest, to deal with out of these 3. And I think social space in itself can actually be split into 2 categories. The first one being, you're alone or, you don't have like a consistent group or somebody to constantly, connect with. This is the roughest spot to be out of everything. It's extraordinarily hard to find others that may be of the same skill level as you in a game, for example, or that are simply interested in the same sort of stuff. But man, just having one other person in your life to share a challenge or a goal with, I find just has immeasurably massive impact on success and maybe even fulfillment. And I also just gotta be honest with this one right out of the gate. Finding a group or just another person to connect with is always going to be hard. There are no shortcuts to doing it, and really you do need to tap into those stores of willpower and discipline, or maybe we can call it social stamina. In this case might be a better term here, which is also finite by the way, and just join one of those groups that you might find on Discord or through the guild finder, even as far as like World of Warcraft goes, and just try it out. The best piece of advice I have personally though for this situation is to just practice not letting others that you may interact with get you down. It's easier said than done, I get it, but there's so much toxicity around us, particularly in gaming nowadays, that when you run into these situations, it's not worth wasting your willpower on that. It's not worth wasting those mental resources that you don't have as much of already. But it is something that can be practiced. And if you're in this position, just remember that you are in no way obligated to try and correct people who are committed to being toxic. It's best to focus on reclaiming as much of your time and energy as you can and just move on to an experience that will hopefully be more positive. Now, the other part of this social space or social environment that I want to cover is obviously if you're already in a group. And the thing about this is making sure you're checking in and identifying if that group is still helping or hurting your urges or if they're helping or hurting your resistances that you run into. And it's really as simple as that. Accountability is super important. You just can't afford to surround yourself with people that are negative or even apathetic, which I think people forget about that one a lot. We focus on the negative so often that maybe we just forget that apathy is actually just like almost as damaging in many different circumstances. So you really got to look out for that. You got to really look out for people that might not be negative per se, but that just like don't seem to care at all about anything. But yeah, just look around your current groups and ask yourself, are these people holding me back? Am I getting what I want out of, this relationship or relationships, if it's multiple people? And something that I've had to get used to as well over the years is asking myself, are they getting what they want from me? Because that's something that's also like easily forgettable. And these groups and even one-on-one relationships will change over time. And so we kind of need to adapt constantly. And it's just another thing that we should look out for. You might not currently be in a situation to answer these questions right now. It might not be needed. And that would be an amazing spot to be in. But I know a lot of people can fall under these, categories. And I know people really struggle with social space and environment. If that all sounds really tough and scary to deal with right now, I totally get it. But there are other ways to modify our environment too. And I would say physical space is obviously another big one, and probably the one that people talk about the most, I would say. And it might sound completely ridiculous, but physical space isn't just about location. Like very common examples would include where we perform our work, or, versus where we game, or where we, read or draw, or whatever it is that we're doing. I often ask myself, would it be better for me to do, XYZ, outside or on a walk, whether it's in nature or not? I think movement can make a big difference. Or would I be better off isolating myself somewhere else? These are all very common questions, but this is also about what our actual bodies are coming into contact with. And that is the big thing I kind of want to outline here. What I will often ask myself now is, are the clothes that I'm wearing comfortable or appropriate for the task or whatever it is I'm doing? What about the chair I'm sitting in? Am I clean? Did I shower yet today? Did I forget to put on my deodorant? It sounds so silly, but I don't know about you guys, this type of stuff completely throws me off depending on what I'm trying to do. These are the type of little things that come up that will have you asking yourself, what am I doing wrong? I don't understand why I can't get anything done. And then you just constantly overthink it. And then it turns out that the hole in your sock was actually driving you absolutely insane throughout the whole day, and you just needed to change it to feel normal again. Like stuff like that. Or maybe you have one key in your keyboard that's broken or doesn't work all the time, but you refuse to spend the money to get a new one or to try to fix it. But trust me, after enough time has passed, that key will be the end of you. It will drive you mad. So I guess in essence, as far as your physical environment goes, try looking at and identifying like the tiny, prodding, nagging, annoying things that might actually be having a bigger impact on you than you think. And finally, I just want to touch on mental space really quick, because like I said, it is kind of a question mark for me. Like, is this really environment related, I guess? But I don't know. When I was thinking about this, I just couldn't help but realize how oblivious I am to what my brain is doing at any given moment. I'm an oblivious person in general most of the time already, but this is like on a different level. We just fill our mental spaces with so much clutter at times that it can make it difficult for us to realize when it's holding us back exactly. So for this, I think maybe some questions like, am I having fun right now? Is a good one, because maybe what you're doing isn't worth your time in the first place, or maybe you're overthinking it. Maybe I've convinced myself that this thing I'm doing should be fun because other people enjoy it, or whatever the reason might be. I cannot tell you how many times I've run into this so much with World of Warcraft over the years. It's ridiculous. I can't count how many times I've actually convinced myself for months at a time that I enjoy high-level PvE content, and every single time I always find out too late that I just don't. I've done this exact same thing with PvP in WoW as well, and honestly in other games in general, like League or, pick any FPS you want. And again, I really just don't like it. Yeah, I can remember back in Mist of Pandaria, I chose that to be the expansion that I just dedicated myself to PvP and nothing else. And when I look back on it now, I just can't help but ask myself, why did I do that? I ignored the insane amount of content that the expansion had to do this like one thing that I was really just trying to convince myself was fun, or the thing that I just wanted to do and nothing else. To be fair, Mists of Pandaria was a great time for PvP, but it still doesn't change the fact that it's not my thing. And if something isn't your thing, boy does that feel like a big waste of time. And speaking of PvP and high-level content in general, the question of is my goal or my hobby or my task too complex also comes up. And if that does end up being the case, can it be simplified somehow to make it easier to do? Can it be made easier with technology, like an add-on or an app? For me personally, a to-do list app on my phone is basically required. It's a necessity because I use that to remind myself to complete all the basic tasks that you have to do as an adult that I don't want to have to worry about. I don't want to have to keep that in my head so it takes up mental energy and space. If I had to remember to do the laundry on certain days or do the dishes at a certain time each day, etc., just like stuff like that, it will live in my head and not somewhere else. And as a result, I'm just using up a crazy amount of mental energy to keep track of those things when I could easily be using that energy on something else. You could also ask yourself, are you getting distracted? And if so, obviously, what are you getting distracted by? And, what else are you thinking about on each given day that's holding you back? It's a lot to think about, all these things, and now that I'm thinking about this more and hearing myself talk about it out loud, going through these questions is also, in fact, putting even more of a mental load on ourselves and myself right now as I'm talking. So, it might be good to not ask yourself all these questions at once. It is a lot. So maybe take it slow. Start small, start with one thing, and kind of work through them over time. So to kind of cap things off, we've got social, physical, and mental spaces, or environments as I'm trying to refer to them as. Check in with these every once in a while and get a feel for how things are going. Because if they're not going well, then maybe it's time for a change. But the big thing I want to stress for today is to pay attention to your stores of willpower and discipline, and I guess social stamina as well if you want to look at it that way. Are you giving yourself enough time for those resources to charge? Or are you constantly draining those batteries until they practically melt? If it's the latter, try changing up your environment to alleviate that stress, even if it's just by a little bit. That's going to be it for me for today. Let me know what you guys think about all of this in the comments below. And as always, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.